The morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground as Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. The weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air, mixed with the salty breeze from the nearby ocean. Today marked the beginning of what many considered impossible: her journey to become one of the first women to attempt Navy SEAL training. At 26, Sarah had already proven herself countless times. Her military record spoke volumes: top marks in every fitness test, exceptional performance in combat scenarios, and leadership skills that earned respect from even the most skeptical colleagues. Yet as she stood among the other recruits, she could feel the familiar sting of doubt from those around her. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy. 53 recruits had gathered from across the military branches, each believing they had what it took to earn the coveted SEAL trident. Sarah noticed the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by, and the obvious attempts to size her up. She had grown accustomed to being the only woman in military settings. But this felt different. The stakes were higher, and the scrutiny was more intense. Commander James Rodriguez stood before the group, his weathered face showing decades of experience in the most challenging military operations. His eyes swept across the assembled recruits, pausing briefly on each face as if trying to read their potential for success. When his gaze landed on Sarah, something flickered across his expression. Not doubt, but curiosity, mixed with professional assessment. The first day of training began with what the instructors called, "Welcome to your new reality." Physical assessments that would break most people were just the beginning. Sarah watched as several recruits struggled with tasks she completed with relative ease. Her years of preparation had included not just physical conditioning, but mental preparation for the unique challenges she would face as a woman in this environment. During the initial medical examination, Sarah found herself in a sterile room with Dr. Patricia Chen, the facility's medical officer. The routine checkup proceeded normally until Dr. Chen noticed something that made her pause. On Sarah's left shoulder blade was an intricate tattoo, a design that seemed familiar, yet puzzling in this military context. The tattoo depicted a phoenix rising from flames, but it was the small symbols woven into the design that caught the doctor's attention. Ancient symbols that seemed out of place on a young soldier's body. Dr. Chen made a note in Sarah's file, though she wasn't entirely sure why the tattoo felt significant. Word traveled quickly through the tight-knit community of instructors. By evening, several had heard about the recruit with the unusual tattoo. Most dismissed it as curiosity about body art, but Commander Rodriguez found himself thinking about it long after the day's training had ended. Something about the description nagged at him, triggering a memory he couldn't quite place. The second week of training brought increased intensity. The recruits were pushed to their physical and mental limits through obstacle courses, underwater training, and endurance tests that separated the determined from the merely hopeful. Sarah excelled in most areas, her performance often matching or exceeding that of her male counterparts. However, excellence came with a price. The better she performed, the more resentment grew among some recruits who struggled with the idea of a woman succeeding where they might fail. Comments became more pointed, challenges more aggressive, and the atmosphere increasingly hostile for Sarah. Marcus Thompson, a recruit from Texas with a reputation for crude humor, seemed to take particular pleasure in Sarah's presence. He made jokes about her ability to handle the pressure, questioned whether standards had been lowered to accommodate her, and generally worked to undermine her confidence at every opportunity. Several other recruits joined in, creating an atmosphere of constant tension. The harassment wasn't limited to verbal jabs. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction when Sarah needed it. Her gear would be moved or tampered with, and she often found herself excluded from informal study groups where recruits shared tips and strategies for upcoming challenges. The instructors maintained professional neutrality, but Sarah could see that some were watching the situation carefully. Despite the challenges, Sarah's performance continued to impress. During a particularly difficult underwater exercise, she not only completed the required tasks, but assisted another recruit who was struggling. The act of helping a fellow trainee, especially one who had been among her critics, began to shift some opinions. Commander Rodriguez observed this incident from the pool deck, noting how Sarah's focus remained on the mission rather than personal grievances. He had seen many promising recruits derailed by ego or the need to prove themselves at others' expense. Sarah's maturity in handling both the training challenges and social pressures suggested something special. The tattoo incident occurred during the third week, in the locker room after an exhausting day of beach runs and equipment drills. Sarah was changing clothes when several recruits noticed her shoulder tattoo clearly for the first time. The lighting in the locker room revealed details that hadn't been visible during quick glimpses in training gear. Marcus Thompson was the first to comment, his voice carrying the mocking tone that had become his trademark when addressing Sarah. He pointed at the tattoo and made a crude joke about women who felt the need to decorate their bodies to get attention. Other recruits laughed, though some seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. What started as general mockery became more specific as the recruits examined the tattoo more closely. The phoenix design was elaborate, but it was the symbols within it that drew particular attention and ridicule. The ancient markings looked foreign and mysterious, leading to speculation about their meaning and Sarah's reasons for choosing them. The situation escalated when one recruit suggested the symbols might be gang markings or some form of code that could indicate divided loyalties. The accusation was serious in a military context, where loyalty and trustworthiness were fundamental requirements. Sarah found herself defending not just her tattoo choice, but her entire character and commitment to service. The commotion in the locker room grew louder, attracting the attention of instructors outside. Sarah tried to explain that the tattoo was personal and meaningful to her, but her explanations only seemed to fuel more questions and suspicions. The atmosphere became increasingly hostile as recruit after recruit joined in the speculation about the tattoo's significance. Unknown to the recruits, Commander Rodriguez had been walking past the locker room when the noise level increased. Standard procedure would have been to send another instructor to investigate and restore order. However, something about the tone of the voices and the mention of symbols made him decide to look into the situation personally. As Rodriguez approached the locker room door, he could hear Sarah's voice trying to remain calm while explaining that her tattoo was a personal choice, with no hidden meanings. The defensive tone in her voice and the aggressive questioning from other recruits painted a clear picture of what was happening inside. The moment that would change everything was approaching, though none of the participants realized it yet. Rodriguez paused outside the door, his mind racing as fragments of memory began to coalesce around something he had seen before. Symbols that matched what the recruits were describing. Symbols that held significance far beyond what anyone in that room could imagine. The discovery was about to transform not just Sarah's experience in SEAL training, but potentially her entire understanding of her own history and identity. The tattoo she had worn for years as a personal reminder of overcoming challenges was about to reveal connections she never knew existed. Inside the locker room, the tension continued to build as Sarah faced increasing pressure to explain every detail of her tattoo's design and meaning. She maintained her composure, but the stress of constant scrutiny, while trying to excel in the most demanding training program in the military, was beginning to take its toll. The stage was set for a revelation that would surprise everyone involved and change the course of Sarah's military career in ways she could never have anticipated. The symbols on her shoulder were about to connect her to a legacy she had never known existed, and in the hands of Commander Rodriguez lay the key to understanding that connection. Commander Rodriguez stepped into the locker room with the authority that came naturally to him after decades of military service. The heated conversation stopped immediately as all recruits snapped to attention, their earlier bravado evaporating in the presence of their commanding officer. Sarah stood straighter despite the emotional toll of the previous minutes, her training overriding the stress she felt. The silence in the room was thick as Rodriguez's eyes moved from recruit to recruit before settling on Sarah. His expression was unreadable, giving no indication of whether he had heard the conversation or what his response might be. The other recruits exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware that their behavior might have consequences beyond simple embarrassment. Rodriguez approached Sarah slowly, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, in a stance that suggested deep thought rather than immediate disciplinary action. When he spoke, His voice was measured and calm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen more than most people could imagine in their lifetime. "Martinez, I need to see your shoulder tattoo," he said simply. The request sent a wave of confusion through the room. The other recruits had expected a lecture about appropriate conduct, or perhaps punishment for the disruption they had caused. Instead, their commanding officer was asking to examine the very tattoo that had sparked the controversy. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, before nodding and positioning herself so Rodriguez could see the design clearly. Rodriguez moved closer, his eyes focusing intently on the symbols woven into the phoenix design. As he studied the intricate markings, his breathing became more measured, and a look of recognition slowly spread across his face. The ancient symbols that had seemed mysterious and suspicious to the other recruits clearly meant something specific to him. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, Rodriguez stepped back. His expression had changed dramatically from the professional neutrality he typically maintained. There was something approaching awe in his eyes, mixed with confusion and the unmistakable look of someone who had just encountered something he never expected to see. "Where did you get this tattoo, Martinez?" His voice carrying a tone that suggested the answer was far more important than anyone in the room understood. Sarah straightened her shoulders before responding. She explained that she had gotten the tattoo 5 years earlier, shortly after completing her first deployment. The design had come to her in a dream during a particularly difficult period in her military service, and she had worked with a tattoo artist to recreate what she had seen. The symbols had felt meaningful to her, though she couldn't explain why or what they represented. Rodriguez listened carefully to every word, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details of the dream or the process of creating the tattoo. His questions were precise and focused, suggesting he was looking for particular information rather than simply satisfying curiosity. The other recruits remained silent, sensing that something significant was happening but unable to understand what. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely from the hostile mockery of minutes earlier to something approaching reverence. Marcus Thompson, who had been the most vocal critic, now seemed small and uncertain as he watched his commanding officer's intense focus on the woman he had been ridiculing. After completing his initial examination, Rodriguez made a decision that surprised everyone present. He dismissed all the other recruits from the locker room, ordering them to report to the mess hall for evening meal. The instruction was given in a tone that brooked no argument or delay, and the room emptied quickly as the recruits filed out in silence. Once alone with Sarah, Rodriguez's demeanor changed noticeably. The rigid military posture relaxed slightly, and when he spoke again, there was something almost personal in his voice. He asked Sarah to sit down, suggesting that what he was about to tell her would be easier to process if she wasn't standing at attention. Rodriguez began by asking about Sarah's family background, particularly her paternal lineage. Sarah explained that she knew very little about her father's family beyond basic information. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother had remarried, moving them away from his side of the family. There had been little contact with paternal relatives, and much of that family history remained unknown to her. The commander nodded thoughtfully at this information, as if it confirmed something he had suspected. He then did something unprecedented in Sarah's military experience. He began to share personal information about his own background and experiences that seemed unrelated to her training or performance. Rodriguez explained that early in his career, he had served with a small, elite unit that operated in classified missions around the world. The unit had distinctive symbols and traditions that were known only to its members and a select few in military leadership. These symbols represented values of honor, sacrifice, and extraordinary service that went beyond normal military expectations. As Rodriguez continued his explanation, he reached into his wallet and withdrew a small, worn photograph. The black and white image showed a group of men in military uniforms, their faces serious and determined. He handed the photograph to Sarah, pointing to a specific individual in the group. "That's Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez," Rodriguez said quietly. "He saved my life and the lives of 6 other men during a mission in Central America in 1987. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with, and one of the most honorable men I've ever known. Sarah studied the photograph carefully, noting the family resemblance in the facial features of the man Rodriguez had identified. The realization began to dawn on her even before Rodriguez confirmed what she was beginning to suspect. The man in the photograph was her father, captured in his military service years before she was born. Rodriguez continued his story, explaining that Carlos Martinez had been part of a special operations unit that used specific symbols to identify members and commemorate their service. These symbols were considered sacred by unit members and were incorporated into various personal items and decorations as a way of maintaining connection to their brothers in arms. The symbols on Sarah's tattoo were exact matches for the unit insignia that her father had worn with pride throughout his military service. The probability of Sarah independently choosing these specific symbols for her tattoo was astronomically small, leading Rodriguez to believe that some deeper connection existed between Sarah's memories and her father's legacy. As the pieces fell into place, Sarah felt a mixture of emotions that ranged from excitement to confusion to grief for the father she had barely known. The tattoo that had brought her ridicule and suspicion was actually a connection to a military heritage she had never known existed. Her father had been a decorated soldier whose service had earned the respect of men like Commander Rodriguez. Rodriguez shared additional details about her father's service, including specific missions and the circumstances that had led to his decoration for valor. Carlos Martinez had been known for his integrity, his loyalty to his fellow soldiers, and his unwillingness to abandon anyone under his command. These qualities had made him legendary within the special operations community. The conversation extended far beyond what would normally occur between a commanding officer and a recruit, but the circumstances were far from normal. Rodriguez explained that he had often wondered what had happened to Carlos Martinez's family after his death, and had occasionally tried to locate them without success. The military records from that era were incomplete, and the family had apparently moved and changed names after Sarah's mother remarried. As the evening progressed, Rodriguez shared stories about Sarah's father that painted a picture of a man she wished she could have known better. Carlos Martinez had been a mentor to younger soldiers, a strategist whose tactical thinking had saved lives, and someone who believed deeply in the values that the military was supposed to represent. The revelation also explained some aspects of Sarah's own military performance that had impressed her instructors. Her instinctive understanding of tactics, her natural leadership abilities, and her unwillingness to leave fellow soldiers behind were all traits she seemed to have inherited from a father she barely remembered. Rodriguez made it clear that this information would not affect Sarah's training or evaluation in any way. She would still need to meet the same standards as every other recruit, and she would receive no special consideration because of her father's service. However, he wanted her to understand the significance of the symbols she wore and the legacy they represented. The conversation concluded with Rodriguez offering to provide Sarah with additional information about her father's service, including photographs and records that might help her understand more about the man who had shaped her genetic heritage. He also mentioned that there were other veterans from her father's unit who would be honored to meet her and share their memories. As Sarah prepared to leave the locker room, Rodriguez offered one final piece of advice. He suggested that she might want to consider the source of her tattoo inspiration more carefully. Dreams often carried messages that the conscious mind didn't fully understand, and it was possible that her connection to her father's legacy ran deeper than simple genetics. The evening ended with Sarah walking to the mess hall with a completely different understanding of herself and her place in the military community. The tattoo that had marked her as an outsider among her fellow recruits was actually a symbol of belonging to a tradition of service that preceded her own military career by decades. The mockery from her fellow recruits now seemed insignificant compared to the revelation about her family heritage. She had entered SEAL training as Sarah Martinez, a female recruit fighting to prove herself worthy of joining an elite military unit. She was leaving the locker room as the daughter of Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, a decorated veteran whose service had earned the respect of some of the finest soldiers in military history. The transformation in her understanding was complete, but the real test would come in how this new knowledge affected her performance in training and her relationships with fellow recruits who had witnessed the entire exchange. The symbols on her shoulder now carried weight and meaning that extended far beyond personal choice, connecting her to a legacy of honor and service that would influence everything that followed. The news of Sarah's family connection spread through the training facility with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. By the following morning, every instructor and most of the support staff knew that the female recruit who had been facing ridicule was actually the daughter of a legendary special operations soldier. The revelation changed the atmosphere around Sarah dramatically, though not always in ways she had expected. Commander Rodriguez had spoken privately with the senior instructors, sharing appropriate details about Carlos Martinez's service and the significance of Sarah's tattoo. The respect these veterans had for her father translated into a more watchful eye on Sarah's progress, though they maintained strict standards for her performance. If anything, some instructors seemed to expect more from her now that they knew her lineage. Among her fellow recruits, the reaction was mixed and complex. Marcus Thompson, who had led the mockery about her tattoo, found himself in an extremely uncomfortable position. Word had reached the recruits about Sarah's father's service, and Thompson's cruel comments now seemed not just inappropriate, but actively disrespectful to a fallen hero's memory. Several recruits approached Sarah privately to apologize for their behavior and express respect for her father's service. These conversations were awkward, but genuine, representing a shift in how she was perceived by at least some of her training cohort. The apologies meant more to Sarah than the mockery had hurt, showing her that most of her fellow recruits were decent people who had simply reacted poorly to an unusual situation. However, not all reactions were positive. Some recruits began to whisper that Sarah would now receive special treatment because of her father's reputation. They suggested that instructors would go easier on her, or that she might advance through training based on her family name rather than her own abilities. These accusations stung because they attacked the very things Sarah valued most: her desire to succeed on her own merit. The pressure of living up to her father's legacy, while also proving herself independently, created a complex emotional challenge for Sarah. Every success was now scrutinized for signs of favoritism, while every failure was examined for evidence that she lacked her father's natural abilities. The weight of expectations, both positive and negative, threatened to undermine her focus on the training itself. Rodriguez recognized the difficult position Sarah now occupied and made a decision that surprised everyone involved. During a training session where recruits were practicing advanced tactical scenarios, he publicly addressed the situation in a way that established clear boundaries and expectations for everyone involved. Standing before the assembled recruits, Rodriguez spoke about the nature of military legacy and what it meant to be connected to previous generations of service members. He emphasized that honor was earned through personal actions, not inherited through family connections. He made it clear that Sarah would be held to the same standards as every other recruit, neither higher nor lower because of her father's service. The commander then shifted his focus to the broader group, addressing the importance of unit cohesion and mutual respect among military personnel. He reminded the recruits that their success or failure would ultimately depend on their ability to work together as a team, regardless of their individual backgrounds or family histories. Rodriguez concluded his remarks by sharing a story about Carlos Martinez that illustrated the values he hoped to see in all the recruits. During a particularly dangerous mission, Carlos had risked his own life to ensure that every member of his team returned safely, even when retreat would have been the tactically sound decision. The story emphasized courage, loyalty, and selfless service, qualities that were available to anyone willing to cultivate them. The impact of Rodriguez's address was immediate and positive. The speculation about special treatment diminished as recruits refocused on their own performance and preparation. Sarah felt some of the pressure lift from her shoulders as it became clear that her father's legacy would be honored but would not define her own journey through training. As the weeks progressed, Sarah's performance continued to be exceptional by any measure. Her physical conditioning remained superior to most recruits. Her tactical thinking showed sophisticated understanding of complex scenarios, and her leadership qualities emerged naturally in group exercises. Most importantly, she demonstrated the mental toughness and resilience that SEAL training was designed to test and develop. The tattoo that had once been a source of ridicule became a symbol of inspiration for some recruits who learned more about the history it represented. Sarah found herself sharing stories about her father's service, not to gain advantage or special consideration, but to honor his memory and help others understand the values that drove exceptional military performance. One particular incident demonstrated how profoundly the situation had changed. During an underwater exercise that pushed recruits to their physical and mental limits, Marcus Thompson found himself in serious difficulty. Equipment malfunction and exhaustion combined to create a potentially dangerous situation that required immediate assistance from a fellow recruit. Without hesitation, Sarah broke from her own exercise to help Thompson, using techniques and procedures that seemed to come naturally to her. Her quick thinking and decisive action prevented what could have been a serious injury, and her willingness to help someone who had previously treated her poorly demonstrated the kind of character that military leaders valued most. Thompson's gratitude was genuine and profound, representing a complete transformation in his attitude toward Sarah. In the days that followed, he became one of her strongest supporters among the recruits, often defending her against any remaining criticism and acknowledging his own previous behavior as immature and inappropriate. The incident also caught the attention of instructors who noted Sarah's instinctive response to a crisis situation. The calm professionalism she displayed under pressure, combined with her technical competence and concern for fellow team members, marked her as someone with exceptional potential for special operations work. As training progressed into its most challenging phases, Sarah continued to excel while building stronger relationships with her fellow recruits. The initial hostility had been replaced by respect and, in many cases, genuine friendship. Her willingness to help others succeed, rather than focusing solely on her own advancement, created a positive dynamic that benefited the entire training group. Commander Rodriguez observed these developments with satisfaction, but not surprise. The qualities he had seen in Carlos Martinez were clearly present in his daughter, though expressed in her own unique way. The combination of inherited aptitude and personal character that Sarah demonstrated was exactly what the SEAL program sought to identify and develop. Near the end of the training program, Rodriguez arranged for Sarah to meet with two veterans who had served with her father in the Special Operations Unit. The meeting took place off-base, in a quiet restaurant where the three could speak freely about Carlos Martinez and his impact on their lives and careers. The veterans, now retired but still carrying themselves with military bearing, shared stories and memories that filled in gaps in Sarah's understanding of her father's character and service. They spoke of his tactical brilliance, his concern for his men, and his unwavering commitment to the mission and his team. They also shared personal details about his hopes for his family and his pride in his daughter, even though she had been very young when he died. These conversations provided Sarah with a deeper understanding of the legacy she carried, but also reinforced her determination to create her own path in military service. She understood now that the symbols on her tattoo represented not just her father's service, but a tradition of excellence that she was honored to continue in her own way. The final weeks of SEAL training tested every recruit's physical capabilities, mental resilience, and commitment to the demanding standards of special operations service. Sarah faced these challenges with the confidence that came from understanding her place in a larger story of military service, while maintaining focus on her own goals and aspirations. When graduation day arrived, Sarah stood among the select few recruits who had successfully completed the program. The tattoo on her shoulder had transformed from a source of mockery to a symbol of honor, representing both her father's legacy and her own achievement. The phoenix, rising from flames, had proved to be a perfect metaphor for her journey through training. Commander Rodriguez presented Sarah with her SEAL trident, in a ceremony that honored not just her individual accomplishment, but also the family tradition of service she represented. In his remarks, he noted that true military excellence often ran in families, not because of genetics alone, but because values and character were passed down through generations. As Sarah left the training facility to begin her career as a Navy SEAL, she carried with her both the pride of personal achievement and the responsibility of honoring her father's memory through her own service. The symbols on her tattoo would continue to remind her of the standards she was committed to maintaining and the legacy she was privileged to continue. The young woman who had entered training as an individual seeking to prove herself worthy of joining an elite military unit was leaving as a member of a tradition that connected her to the finest examples of military service. Her success represented not just personal triumph, but the continuation of a family legacy of honor, courage, and commitment to something greater than individual achievement. The mockery that had threatened to derail her confidence had instead led to the discovery of a heritage that strengthened her resolve and deepened her understanding of what it meant to serve. The tattoo that had once marked her as different had become a symbol of belonging to something magnificent and enduring.